Hello and welcome back. Scientific researcher Donald Adams has been fully committed to the discovery and development of frequency science for the last 20 years. He began primarily interested in wave phenomenon and the characteristics of field effects. His studies were also aimed at understanding consciousness and behavior from a very different perspective. An unexpected spin-off from his research appears to be the discovery of a possible mechanism that can offset and neutralize the adverse effects of celestial bodies, which casts a huge web of frequency vibration onto our planet. He has been able to emulate the sounds that the different planetary bodies in our solar system make. The blend of discovery of the sounds of stars and the sounds of certain mind-body states is what has led to the overall development of this unique science, of which has been a leading thinker, researcher, and developer of the science of frequency healing. The process is still experimental, and Donald Adams, whose background is primarily in computer science and related fields, and who is not a qualified medical professional, has found his frequencies are yielding very dramatic, life-changing results for 3,500 plus volunteers to date that are providing feedback on its effects. This pool of volunteer recipients are reporting dramatic increases to their mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being simply from listening to these sound patterns. The frequencies developed by Donald Adams are the fruits of an extensive period of hard-won discoveries and breakthroughs and are continued to make an ongoing positive difference in people's lives. I would like to welcome Donald Adams to the show. Welcome, Donald. How are you?
Hey, pretty good. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, good. Good. Good to have you too. Yeah, it's been a while. We've been trying to interview you for a while. Our schedules have been very busy. So yeah, finally.
Well, thanks for your patience. Yeah, I think it's been pretty tight for both of us.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So, I'm just a little bit I'm curious. Tell us more about the line of work that you do and what how it works. Would you?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, uh, essentially, I made a math discovery roughly about 13 years ago now, and I've been involved with a number of areas of research, mostly on kind of like a semi-hobby basis. It was something that kind of got funded by the actual work that I did at the time, and on the basis of that discovery, um, over the course of a few years of sort of testing it out, it became apparent that it lent itself well to sonification. In other words, taking a set of data that described phenomena and then converting that into sound pulses. And the phenomena, or the data, was numeric information that contained descriptors of different kinds of states. Those states would include, like, emotional, mental, physical. And what was found was that when the data was converted into sound, or in other kinds of electromagnetic output, different kinds of pulses, whether it was like magnetic field fluctuations, or it could be like, say, radio frequency broadcasts, that when an organism was exposed to that output at a certain magnitude for a certain duration, that effects occurred that were very noticeable, very dramatic. And so what happened at that point was a realization that this could be used as a model or a tool, to effectively support people, and to support them in a way that doesn't really exist on the planet, to my knowledge, anywhere else. I mean,
Yeah.
certainly, I think it would be accurate to say that it's definitely a form of a kind of biofeedback or neurofeedback, and there's certainly some very significant, commonalities between sort of a standard conventional approach to that and the work that I do. But there's also, in my personal opinion, a number of added dimensions and a kind of extra depth to the approach that I take that allows for, I think, a much greater edge, to occur. And so, in a nutshell, I mean, what I do is I study the characteristics, the definitive characteristics of states that occur in organisms. I try to identify and isolate what the constructive and productive ones are, and then I attempt to render that into an output form, whether it's sonic or acoustic or otherwise, so that when it's exposed, to an organism, that's, a very tangible kind of benefit emerges.
Interesting. Wow. So, and it's also your work is also based on the premise that matter is affected by sound, right?
Sure. I mean, I mean, matter. Matter is certainly a kind of condensed, vibration or set of vibrations. Um, you could say you could say that matter is, in a certain kind of phase state, or it's at a certain, I suppose, velocity of energy. So, what might appear to be matter to us, would probably be ethereal, to an observer that was at a different phase state, which is probably why there's so many. I'm guessing it's probably why there's so many, historic accounts of, people claiming that they see things, peculiar paranormal things going through walls and stuff. It's what's probably actually going on. If there is any credence to any account of a person witnessing, what appears to be, an object going through another solid object, then on a purely, scientific, quantifiable level, that would simply mean that you've got things that are at a different phase state or at a different energy density.
Like,
So they,
is that like a dimension, like a phase state?
uh, yeah, I mean, it's funny because there's a lot of different definitions of dimension floating about, even in the different
Scientific.
academic circles. But I mean, loosely, yeah, you could say something
I
like
was
that.
gonna
Sure.
say I was at use loosely the
Yeah, sure,
word.
sure.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, interesting. Um, so I mean, this is a very interesting this is a very interesting work that you're doing, and it's really, really inspiring to see somebody trying to use this technology for good because people discover so I'm not saying everybody's like this, but it seems like a lot of people have discovered a lot of things that could really help us as a human race, but they're choosing or they have chose to use it to benefit themselves or to use it for you know for for malicious purposes, I should say maybe. And I was just wondering, um, can this technology be used for evil?
Well, um, frequency-based technology. Uh, there's different kinds of frequency-based technology, and they're employed, mostly for mundane purposes, just for the, for practical sort of day-to-day utilitarian purposes, and certainly within the spectral range of that, I'm sure that it would be easy to associate different kinds of intentions with those uses, Uh, but if we're going to talk about the exploration and then the use of frequency technology in behavioral sciences or similar, yeah, sure, it's accurate to say that generically frequency technology can be used in a way that we would describe as being not well intended. But
Mm.
if I were to answer specifically in relation to my technology, uh, my response to that would be that I don't believe so. And the reason that I don't believe so is that when I first started off on this, you know, area of research and development, one of the things that mattered a great deal to me, was to actually not pursue something that would ever lend itself to that. And I also wanted to attempt to understand what I was doing enough and to engineer it in a way where it would be impossible to have it rendered that way. And so, to the best of my understanding, um, you know, my understanding currently of the technology that I've developed is that would not be feasible, and there's a number of technical reasons for that. But if I were to use, say, like a very simplistic metaphor, um, imagine that you had a snowflake, and imagine that the snowflake was very large. Say that its surface area was, a few feet. Maybe it was like a couple of feet across, width and height. And
Mm.
if you let's say that you wanted to turn that snowflake into something that was unpleasant to look at, and you wanted to say rearrange the fine, kind of filigreed, structural, parts of it. Well, to do so would break the snowflake and would render it, pretty much, unusable. And so,
Mm.
I would like to say, and I believe that it would be, in its current state. I can't see how it could be engineered that way. It could be engineered maybe to be, on a very low level. It could be engineered to be, maybe a little bit annoying. If it sure,
Yeah.
yeah, if it was something that wasn't rendered correctly, or it had some crude changes made to it, or it had part of its essential parts removed. But then
Mm.
there wouldn't be much difference between that and any kind of noise generator that would be you could so yeah, I don't personally see how it could be um, like weaponized or used in any kind of adverse way. I mean, certainly
But
not to normal human beings.
hmm. Have you have you had any effect with animals, or has people used the technology on animals?
Yeah, we've actually had a number of accounts, really diverse ones, and some strange ones, and a lot of those have been archived, and they're in our online. We have a few online groups, and so we've retained reports that get issued by members and users. Probably the most common ones, I would say, are the everyday pet that people have, like the cat, the dog, the bird. Um, there's also some really strange ones that have happened with wild animals. I can actually read one here to you. It's,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I'm very interested in hearing about that.
I
Yeah.
when I first heard this one, I I was a little bit startled because I really hadn't expected anything like this, and especially when we first started off, a lot of this was very experimental, and so we
Yeah.
were all kind of learning together. Um,
Yeah.
but this was one of our senior members issued this report, and I'll just read this. The subject of the email report was, and she's American. I think she's from the southeast, or she's from Texas. And
Yeah.
so she says, the frequencies are calling the wild birds in my yard! Exclamation. And
Hmm.
her email reads, "Hi, you all. I've been a member for a while, but haven't had the chance yet to share what's been going on with me down in Texas. I've been playing the frequencies while I've been working on my dissertation on sound healing, toning, vibrating oneself to optimum health." I think she was in school and she was doing a paper. And that was the topic of it.
Hmm.
Um, I've been running a loop. She had a couple of tracks, and that we have different titles to the tracks that are quite popular, and I guess they're well loved by the membership. So these are the names of the tracks. She says, "I've been running a loop with Good Luck Evoker, Health Shield, Attract Good Things, Ibogaine, DNA Sweet Spin, Uncanny Timing, and Intuition and Viral Inhibitor." So she's got all these tracks and she's looping them. And she says, "In my opinion, these frequencies definitely help me to stay healthy, centered, and optimistic, as well as inspired while completing my dissertation." And then she says in brackets, "Doc stars and your frequencies, as well as the group, are mentioned in it." And then she says, "So back to the subject matter. While playing the frequencies today in my office, with screen door and windows open to my yard, the wild birds started surrounding my house and were trying as hard as they could to get inside to the sounds, repeatedly attacking my screen door and even entering my garage, searching out the source of the sound.
Hmm.
DNA Sweet Spin and Ibogaine seemed to attract them the most. When I tried to shoosh them away, they completely ignored me, showing
Hmm.
no fear and continued to try to come inside." Wow. exclamation mark, what an experience, exclamation, what do you all think, in harmony, and then she gives her name. And that's on our website. Now, when that first came in, yeah, it was, it wasn't something that I had really fully anticipated or expected.
Mm.
And and over the course of time, we had more reports like that come in. Like there was one of our members was a day trader, financial day trader, and he'd been playing some tracks related to like just kind of like a positive mental financial state type thing, and he'd had his window open, and he hadn't seen a lot of birds in his neighborhood the last for I guess a month or so, and there was a very large tree in front of his house, and I can't remember if he said he had left the house or if he had simply looked outside. I think he said he was getting ready to leave the front door, and as he left the house, he happened to look up in this very large tree, and from what I remember, he said he saw thousands and thousands of bohemian waxwings sitting in it. He said you almost never see them in the neighborhood. They were just sitting there, and he said that they were watching him. And he said that they must have appeared there apparently shortly after he began to play these tracks. So this has become somewhat of a common experience, and there's been a number of other sort of strange accounts with cats and dogs, and I think some horses and some wild animals. There's two things. Some friends of mine from Victoria had gone out to a forest in their car, and it was midday, and it was nice out, nice blue sky summer day, and it was a very thick forest, and they had gone into, from what I remember, it was somewhat of a small field surrounded by a canopy of trees, and they began to just play some tracks just for a kick to see what would happen. And I'm sure they didn't expect anything to happen. And so they were lying on the hood of the car, and I think they said that after about 10 to 20 minutes, they began to get what they said was, it was almost a creepy feeling. It wasn't a bad feeling. They said that, I think they said that it was somewhat positive, but it also felt a bit creepy. And it was as though, they said that it was, the sensation that they had, they claimed, was that it was as though the forest had become much more aware generally, and also much more aware of them in particular. And it felt like the forest was watching them, and they described a few other kinds of strange things. And then another event was this last year. There is a place that's roughly about an hour and a half away from where I live, and it's a decent sized lake. And it's somewhat isolated. There's not a lot of people in the area. There's a few little houses around the perimeter of it. And I'd gone there with my lady friends and her buddy. And it was very late at night, probably about 2 o'clock in the morning.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and very isolated, very quiet. And they had a couple of cigarettes that they were smoking. And I brought some little portable speakers with me, and we were going to just play these tracks into the darkness of this lake to see what would happen. And so we were on the edge of the shore. It was nice out. It was a very dark sky, a lot of stars, and almost a mildly ominous feeling, because you're so far in the middle of nowhere, really. Outside of the city. This is the feeling that we had. And the area that we were in was very marshy, so there was a lot of cattails and a lot of, if you were to go right to the water, you would see that, the area that we were in, the shallow water would have extended, I'm guessing, maybe about 50 feet or so, and all of that 50 feet was just covered with large cattails. So we were kind of sitting back and, laughing and talking, and we were just playing it. And I think after and it was very quiet when we had arrived there. And about 20 minutes after, and we had very cheap speakers. They It was not, yeah, because they were just
They
like
weren't.
little,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
yeah, and just
Yeah.
little portable ones. We plugged it into a iPod or a notebook or something, so the volume couldn't have been like super loud. It was loud enough that you could hear it. And after about 20 minutes, we noticed that there was a whole lot of other sounds going on in the background.
Mm.
And at first, I think we weren't really fully aware of it until it was just we realized, like, wow, what is going on? Like, what is that? So we turned the sound off and we realized that all of these birds must have woken up, and there was quite the orchestra of different sounds, and it was like they were calling to a lot of a lot of birds singing to each other quite a bit. And when we turned the sound off, about another 10 minutes passed, and that sort of faded out. So we did it a couple of times, and
So wait, it's still kind of resonated after you turn it off.
well, what we would
If
do
you,
is, yeah, I mean, when we would turn the frequencies off, the background sound of the birds would subside, from what I recall, maybe about 8 minutes, and then they'd go quiet again. So I mean, I'm guessing we were probably waking them up, but the nature of the
mm,
sounds are such that they travel quite a bit and they're very different. So and we were kind of feeling bad, like, well, we don't want to wake the birds up too
is
much,
that
but
yeah?
sure.
Yeah.
But we were still tempted to just see what would happen, and we tried it a few times, and then we heard something very peculiar off in the distance, and it was like a loud splash, like there was a large body in the water that had been jumping around, and it sounded like it could have been like man-sized, or just big. Now in
Mm.
this area of Canada, uh, I don't know what that would have been. It might have been, maybe it was a dog that was out in the middle or out in the lake doing something, or maybe it was a beaver, uh, maybe it was a deer. We don't know, but it had a very strange movement pattern, because what would happen is when we began to really notice it, it would make one very very loud splashing sound, and then it would stop, and some time would pass, and then it would be closer, and it would make another splashing, and it was clearly coming towards us, and it was clearly coming towards the sound.
Oh no.
Sure, and so we're feeling a little bit spooked out, because
Yeah.
it's pretty dark. You really can't see what's out there, and we would turn the frequencies on, and then we would turn them off, and so the impression we got was that whatever this thing was, it was big, and it was curious, and it was coming towards us. And so at some point it was quite close, and we decided to just get in the car and go. So as
Yeah.
far as yeah, as far as the response from animal life goes, this seems to be the case.
Well, to me it makes a lot of sense, especially since your technology is based on the frequencies that stars make, and then if you go into astrological science, they talk about like how the celestial bodies have effect on our emotions and our consciousness. So, and animals are definitely more in tune than human beings are. So why wouldn't it have an effect on them as well, you know?
Sure.
I mean, that's what I'm thinking. So I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on stars and the connection that human beings have to the universe, and the fact that people in big cities can't really see stars, right? You can't really see stars unless you go out of the city where it's not lit. And I was just wondering, do you think that can have an effect on our consciousness? The fact that we're kind of disconnected, living in, not saying technologies and living in a big city is bad, but you know,
It's a good question, and I think it's tied into a number of different areas. Not least of which is the very long-standing kind of contest that goes on between traditional astrologers and contemporary scientists, and certainly there's a conversational thread there, to unravel. I don't personally take the stance of a traditional astrologer. I do believe that stellar bodies exert a definable and specific set of effects on organisms, and I think that to a degree there is languaging that exists in astrology that can be somewhat descriptive of that process. But I also think that there is a lot of things going on that is not necessarily well described by astrology. It's an attempt to describe certain mechanics. I
Mm.
also think that in much, not all, but much of the conventional sciences, there is a myopia that exists that is dismissive of phenomena that, and phenomena that's provable, phenomena that is that has been, that has gathered sufficient evidence look at in a quantifiable and qualifiable way to say there is something going on. So I would probably, not be too popular with with some hardcore astrologers, and I probably wouldn't be too popular with, some conventional scientists. But to answer your question about, first of all, do I think that stellar bodies, including stars, can have an effect on organisms, on life? Yeah. And I think that there's hard science that proves that's the case. And I think that there's an affectation across multiple vectors, including the blood, the various energetic fields in the body, certainly the nervous system. But then if we take a look at that part of your question that's asking, is the visual acuity, or is the ability to see, say, stars or starlight in a given environment, is that ability to see, or the lack of being able to see, how would that affect us? My answer to that would be that the affecting qualities of stellar bodies, for the most part, would exert an influence regardless of whether one was able to see them visually or not. Within a certain, there was a really interesting study that was done a while ago.
Mm.
There's a few of them actually, and there was a subject that was addressed, and that was that when cosmic particles are entering the atmosphere, to what extent, when they're falling through the atmosphere and they're impacting, say, the soil, or if they're impacting like a body of water, to what depth penetration do they exert any kind of an effect, and at what point, is their effect muted? Well, we do know that there are certain kinds of natural barriers that can have a muting, or a neutralizing effect on some cosmic particles. So if you were to ask me, if you had a person that was, say, living in an area that was very naturally beautiful, and there wasn't a lot of atmospheric pollution, and the sky was somewhat easy to view, in contrast to someone living in a very urban, highly populated area with a lot of, dense pollution in the atmosphere, would there be any detectable difference? There probably would be, sure. And there would probably be, because, part of what you're dealing with here is a precipitant. So, you're dealing with an energetic precipitant that is comprising both particulate mass and matter, the cosmic particles, and you're also dealing with different wavelengths. So, and there's probably a very good argument to make that you can affect on some level the physiology of an organism from the input information presented to it. So, for example, if visual stimuli is presented to a human being of a certain type and order, etc., change can be. We know this is true. This is the exposure to different kinds of colors of light.
Yeah.
So it's actually a
Yeah.
very good question that you've asked, and I think that certainly, if nothing else, a person that probably saw starlight on a regular basis, as opposed to someone who didn't, I would say that there's probably a reasonable chance that there would be some degree of psychological affectation, if nothing else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Interesting. So I'm just curious. What just off the fly, if you can name some of the testimonials that you've had with people in illnesses um that have been, I mean, I saw your video too. You talked about you had a sore feet and how you were able to that was really cool.
Yeah, it was a weird
You
experience,
have a
man.
lot of testimonials. I was looking, so I know we can't go through all of them, but if you can just remember a couple as far as like,
Yeah,
you
sure.
know,
Well,
and any I'm sorry, go on.
no, no.
Like, and I was wondering if you had any testimonials with people that had autism.
Oh, yeah. Uh, well, the answer to the last question first. I mean, yeah, we've definitely had some pretty positive feedback and support, from parents with autistic children. Most of the cases that were brought to my attention uh, were parents that were more elderly and were dealing with adult autistic children that were in their care. Um, and yeah, we actually got some pretty interesting breakthrough reports from individuals. To answer your first question, um, you know, what I've noticed subjectively is that there are some paradigms that are legal and some paradigms that are not.
Mm,
And a paradigm is not necessarily equivalent to, truth or natural law. So, there may actually be a objective reality that could be provable, but it may not be legal paradigm-wise.
yeah,
So when we take a look at the consumer population, some paradigms they're allowed, to exist within, and other paradigms they're not. And so one of the paradigms that they are not allowed to have, regardless of whether it's true or not, has to do with some of the phenomena that exists out there encompassing aspects of frequency technology. So uh, due to the current artificially created paradigm, I am not permitted to tell people that my frequency technology, can treat, cure, or deal with any kind of physical illness, regardless of whether it can or not.
yeah,
And I'm also not qualified by the state or government regulating bodies in North America, to speak as though I'm able to diagnose or treat any kind of physical condition. One of the reasons that you know we have the structure that we do is that if somebody gets better because they're using my work, it isn't my fault. You see, I
hmm,
can't be blamed for someone getting
yeah,
well. And so if anyone's going to accept any blame for getting better because they've used something I've created, it's their fault.
hmm,
And that's the only way that it can be permitted or allowed. So my part of
yeah,
my answer to you would be that there are people within our um, membership, or people that are participating, or people that are using my work on a regular basis,
hmm,
who believe that my work is making them better. And apparently there are clinical labs in Europe that have done very real studies on the effects of my work, including blood analysis workup, who seem to feel as though, that my frequency technology is having a measurable, enormous change in things like blood terrain. So we're talking about blood that's in a heavy rouleau state being, suddenly shifted into a healthy terrain within a couple of hours.
hmm,
And this is ex vivo. This is not in vivo. This is not this is not drawing the blood out and then treating it, like they've done at Albert Einstein University and then putting it back. There
oh,
isn't any, or sorry, this is in vivo, not ex vivo. I got that backwards. It's not ex vivo treatment where blood is being taken out and electrified and then being put back in. This is someone who is either exposing themselves to the broadcast, the frequencies through a normal audio venue, or it's someone that's applying something like electrodes. One individual applied piezoelectric style electrodes. They were actually the electrodes that Flanagan uses for his walk or his Thinkman device. They just took the electrodes from that and plugged it into an iPod and played my frequencies, onto their body for a couple of hours. They'd gone into I think it was in Germany, they went into a clinic and had the clinic do a blood sample before and then during and then after. And those photos are on our website. And the clinician said, well, we don't know what's happening. We don't know how it's happening. We don't know why. But it appears as though whatever it is you're using there has caused the blood cells in your body to homogeneously separate, and they appear to have increased in electrical and magnetic field charge. And you got to keep in mind that, like, when Rouleau occurs, that spherical blood cells dimple and they stack like dinner plates because they don't have enough electrical charge to repel each other. So somehow what he was doing actually conveyed, and through some means of inductance and probably patterning, caused those cells to not only physically inflate, like physically go back to being spherical, but it increased their inherent electrical charge. And then we've also got recorded hyper acceleration of plaque growth, and there was a bunch of tests done where the case study included a specimen that received no treatment, specimen that received a kind of acoustic treatments. I think it was like Tibetan gong music or something. It was some kind of compatible or comparable sound therapy that was out there, and then one that was exposed to our frequencies. And our frequencies, and this isn't me trying to promote or
You're allowed to promote. That's fine.
yeah, but well, thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah, but I mean, it's if we were in a situation where we had honestly run across something that gave an equivocal result, then properly and scientifically that should be reported. But in this particular case, that wasn't the case. In
Yeah.
this particular scenario, the use of our frequencies caused much superior. It was way more accelerated, way more accelerated. So, if you were to ask me what kinds of things have other people reported that they've experienced as health improvements, it's a wide range of stuff that I've heard of. People have reported to me that chronic fatigue. There was one fellow who I think he was elderly in his 80s, and he had not been cane free for I think decades. I think he said he used 2 canes to get around. And within I think it was about a 6 to 8 month period where he was using our work mainly on and off. And I think he was also taking some supplements and doing a few other things. He said that for the first time in a very long time, I think he said he was either walking without a cane or he was only using 1 cane occasionally. And his joints, and he was happy. We had another lady. This is early on. This is using some of our more simple and primitive work. She came to me, and she was in a panic. She was living in the States, and she had a very severe bowel colon problem, and she'd already spent a small fortune, and I think she was on a pension. And if I remember the details correctly, it was a number of years ago, but if I remember correctly, she had said that I think she had spent somewhere in the area of about $20,000 to $25,000. For her, that was a lot because that constituted her life savings, and I think that was pretty much gone. And the problem hadn't gone away, and she had not been able to poo for I think she had said, if I remember right, it had been about 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks.
Oh, wow.
And she said she was very ill, and she didn't know what to do because she had gone through a number of treatments that she could afford, and she hadn't gotten better, and she was afraid for her life.
Yeah.
And
Dysentery, right? You can just die.
well,
Yeah.
sure, and not a very pleasant way to die.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and so she sent me an email, a couple of emails, which I still have, and she had said that she had gone to a normal allopath in her, I believe it was in her city and state, who she liked and who was trying something different from the other doctors. And the allopath was using some variation of some kind of sound-based therapy. And she said from what I recall, she said that it was simpler, and it sounded like it was a bit more primitive. But she said that when this doctor had been treating her with this, she said that for some reason she had been feeling a bit better, and I think she said that she had had some degree of movement, not a lot, but the doctor was somewhat hopeful that there would be some kind of progress. Obviously, an allopath that was exploring alternative health and wellness avenues, and so she asked me if I could do anything for her. And this was in the very early stages of the stuff that we were doing. And my response to her was, well, look, I'm very sorry. I don't know. I actually don't know. I said, we can try. I can take a look at what I think is happening in the model, and we can try to design something for you, and you can test it out. So I did something up for her, and she went away, and I didn't hear back from her for probably about 4 or 5 days. And when she came back, she was very happy, and she was ecstatic, and she gave me a fairly descriptive report as to just how fabulous her bowel movements had become. And she felt encouraged, and apparently she had been able to evacuate the buildup of the waste materials, and I think she, if I recall, I think she might have said something about like her doctor was very happy and was surprised and wondered what she was doing and this sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, there's certainly been areas of progress that we've seen. A lot of people reporting, 80. I think it was probably in the area of around an 80% decrease of chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia style symptoms.
Okay.
People that felt like they had been debilitated to the point of near paralysis for some time, and they felt like their lives had been turned around. They were actually able to, get up and do stuff. So yeah, and there's been other things like dependencies. People with certain
drug addictions.
there's been people that have reported some positive progress made there, and they have not, the ones that are the most distinctive, these were people who became friends of mine afterwards, and they were professionals, and they were in some cases very well respected in their field, and they didn't want their story to come out because they're dealing with areas of responsibility, and they didn't want to risk any kind of damage to their reputation. And we've got people that are celebrities, from different countries, people that are fairly well known, abroad, internationally, and also within their own country, that use it anonymously, because in some cases what they're using it for is something that they might feel, I don't
Embarrassed by,
well,
or
sure, and I can see that, in many cases. Sometimes it would be nice if the soap opera star would come out and just say yeah, it's okay, I'm using this stuff and I like it, but it's their prerogative. I mean, if they want to report it, they want to report it. If they don't, they don't. So that's fine.
It's interesting. One thing I find interesting about you seem to have this let's learn together, let's try and work with this technology, even though I'm putting it on the table, but let's try and come to consensus and put our thoughts and try and figure this thing out together. And I've come across some scientific researchers, and they're very, some of them have God complexes. I'm not saying all of them do, or they're greedy. They have their ego. They're controlled by their ego or their lust for money or power. I mean, why do you choose to have this kind of, I guess this is for lack of a better word, but I'm just going to call it like a learning together approach instead of going down the other way where you can,
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could give you a single answer, and I don't know if I could give you a simple answer, but if I were to make the attempt, I would say that, in a nutshell, if we don't take that approach, and if we don't take that approach now, we're not going to make it as a species. You
Yeah.
know, I mean,
Yeah.
it was Buckminster Fuller who said that that hyper specialization is the precursor, to the extinction of species. And
Yeah.
I think that it's a very valid thing for an individual to, cultivate and develop an expertise and, knowledge, understanding, authority, um, on a subject or a set of subjects. And I think it's also reasonable for them to, to experience, appropriate reward for their effort. But I don't think it's appropriate at all to monopolize a given pursuit, uh, certainly institutionally. And
Yeah.
and I think that any time that that's happened, uh, we end up with, things like, Nazi movements forming, because
Yeah.
what it usually gets down to is, I mean, like most people have, the general public is aware of this, but people that are in the sciences, whether they're in the mainstream or the even in the alternative areas, if they're paying attention and if they're awake and aware, they know full well that part of the reason that there is such a complexity to the languaging of their discipline has to do with protectionism. I mean, Einstein himself said,
Hmm.
if you can't explain something simply, you don't understand it well enough. And
Wow.
I know that it's a form of protectionism, and it's also a form of collective control.
Segregation? I was
Absolutely,
gonna say.
absolutely.
Wow,
And
I never, yeah, now that you bring that up, I'm like, oh, yeah, yeah,
sure.
you're right. You're
Hmm.
right. Because even being a teacher, I feel that, you can explain just about anything to children if you put it simply
Sure.
and in a way that they can understand. They might not have the terminology for certain things, but you can get a concept across, you know, um,
Yeah.
pretty easily if you're careful, not careful, but if you're, I guess maybe careful about the words that you choose,
Hmm.
Wow, that's really, I'm glad you brought that up. That's really, yeah, it was a really, really good point. Um, so, have you, I guess you kind of answered. I was going to ask you, what are your thoughts on a modern day science and conventional science? So where do you see it going?
I see it going. I'd say the current momentum that's in place as it stands right now, I see it going towards a very destructive and a very degenerative, uh, you know, horizon point. I think that there are some areas of the sciences that hold a lot of hope, and I think that there's a small number of individuals, small number of groups that are in place right now that are sort of carrying the torch and that they're making an effort, and there may be some great potential good that comes out of that. But there was a movie that came out um, over 10 years ago, and it was a remake of what was it called? Leonard Nimoy, I think, was the producer, and he actually starred as a
Oh, Brave New World?
Brave New World.
Yeah.
And he said there's this quote in there where they're interviewing the savage, the noble savage that they brought in. They're talking to him, and they're
Yeah.
also talking to the main character, male character that lives in the urban environment, and they're having this little kind of like powwow coffee, and the master directors, the guy that's running the show of this complex, city environment, and the master director is saying, well, we had to do away with art, and we had to do away with science, and we had to do
I
away with,
remember that.
sure, we had to get rid of history.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
they're kind of surprised by this. Even the guy that's the male lead character that is in the urban environment, he asks the master director, he says, well, how can you say that we don't follow science? I said, I thought our advanced future society was all about science. And so Leonard Nimoy, the master director, just kind of laughs. He goes, oh, no, not real science, only technology that serves the public order.
Hmm.
So I think that what would be found is that much of the science that passes today as science, both in the corporate environment and also in academia, it's not science generally. It's technology that
Yeah.
serves a public order that has a very specific agenda in place. And that agenda is not, it is definitely not the liberation of humanity as a species. The
Yeah.
agenda is,
The
is
opposite, the enslavement of humanity as a species, or either the extinction of humanity as a species. I
it's,
would say. I mean,
sure,
would you?
it's processing.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
has to do with, how do we get the most out of, the commodification of humanity. That's it.
Wow.
Humanity as a commodity, whatever technology serves the commodification and the harvesting of that commodity better. This is where the money goes to support, that kind of science. So I don't see it going anywhere terribly good. Most of the great scientists of the last 100 years that I'm aware of were persecuted. They were never rewarded reasonably well, or at least not usually rewarded very well. And they usually had to experience a great deal of resistance and hardship, to get any of their findings out there. So,
Yeah.
it's interesting because even with Wilhelm Reich, uh, after they,
Wait, is this a guy at Oregon Energy?
yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's on record that after they, basically charged him and arrested him, when he was in jail, you know, um, on charges of practicing basically, phony science.
Mm.
The government came to him while he was in prison and told him that they wanted him to use his discoveries to develop technology for their exclusive use. And if you do a search on just one of the areas, one of the things that was produced from his unique discoveries was a device called radiosonde, and that's spelled Radiosonde, and that's on public record. And that's a device that was constructed solely from his discoveries, and it was used for a number of things, one of which was weather modification by the government. So this is what
Oh,
happens.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
he's publicly ridiculed,
Yeah.
he's publicly destroyed, and then when he has no options left, he is forced by duress to work for them. So
It's
yeah, I don't
terrible.
I don't really see science as it is right now going anyplace meaningful.
Um, do you believe that we're all here by random chance, or do you think, especially dealing, I want to like to know your point of view as a scientific researcher. Do you feel that there's a higher intelligence in the universe, or it's just all random?
Um, I think that uh, what we refer to as randomicity or randomness is largely a fallacy. I'm not saying that um, random processes don't exist, within a certain degree of how we, within a certain degree of contemporary definition. But I think a lot of what we're told is the nature of randomness is not really true. Um, and I think that I'm quite convinced that there's hard physical evidence, again, across multiple vectors of a higher intelligence. Like I've seen it. I've viewed it firsthand. I know that to be true. Um, and it's there are certainly arenas a person can enter to debate the veracity of what I've just said.
Hmm.
But I think that those arenas are largely constructs that also serve various agendas. I don't think that they're dealing with what is an objective truth. And I know that there are a lot of people that will say things like absolute truth does not exist, or objective reality does not exist. But I think that that is purely a function of a coping mechanism, for a person's chosen worldview or paradigm. I don't think it has anything to do with the reality of things. And And I think that there's also lots of evidence for that. Yeah. So I do think there's a
So,
higher intelligence, and I do think that there is something that passes for randomness, but I also think that there is, really, really quickly, I think that there is a segment of humanity that is present in this, what we call this reality, for a reason.
interesting. Do you consider your work scientific or spiritual or both or something else? What do you?
Well, I mean, I've loved the sciences since I was young, um, and my opinion is that that my work is mainly scientific because it's been derived through scientific process. You know, but there were certainly inputs I that were of an unusual nature that I don't know exactly how to define. That I don't know if I could uh, say with 100% confidence that they were necessarily scientific. So some of the inputs were outside of my ability to define scope-wise. But as far as the compilation and the construction and the developments and then the end result, I would say that this is largely scientific. I can tell you a story. Um,
Yeah, tell me a story.
well,
I'm down for stories.
okay. Uh, One of my greatest teachers and mentors was a professor from Stanford, and his background was mainly in astrophysics. And we, were in contact for a number of years, and our arrangement was one of private tutorship. And I paid him a good chunk of money, but also we were also friends. We evolved into friendship. And he taught me about a number of different things. But one time he told me a story, and he also got involved with various very obscure branches of esoterica, and he got involved with heliocentric. It's called heliocentric astrology, and but he approached that subject from very scrutinizing scientific discipline. And I knew that to be true because when I first met him, I it's not that I poked fun at him, but I mean I have a sciences background, computing sciences, and I knew that he had a robust academic background, and at the time I had a dim view of astrology, and I thought it was laughable that here you are, you have this reputation, you have all these credentials, and I mean, he had tenure at some point, from what I understand, as a senior professor at Stanford. That's not a small feat.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, like, what are you doing playing around? You'd be a laughingstock. What the heck? So he told me a story from his youth. He said that when he was very young, he'd entered a science fair of some kind, and I can't remember. I think he might have said he was like maybe 15 or 16 or something, and I don't remember what it was that he had entered. It might have been like a simple rocket engine, or he loved rockets, and he won something in the science fair. It was a big deal. It was a big, huge. I think it was a countrywide big deal, and so part of the prize that he won was that he was given the opportunity to travel around the country on a train and visit all of the major universities that he wanted to go to and interact with the staff and talk to them and ask them questions. It was like a grand field trip through the science halls of recognized academia, all paid for. And so what happened was he got on the train and he was very excited. He was very looking forward to it because he loved the sciences. And I don't remember exactly, but probably after he'd gone to 2 or 3 different schools, he began to feel very discouraged and very dejected. And I remember listening to the story because we were talking about it on the phone one time, and I was curious as well, like, man, that's a great prize. You're going to all the great schools and you're talking to those people that are the leaders in the sciences. Why would you not enjoy that. And he said, well, you know, Don, I had this image in my mind of visiting these pioneers, these rugged, great men journeying into the unknown. People that could be like my heroes. People that would be like, the great scientists of the past. Because even in even in the Renaissance, during the Renaissance, and up to the 18th century, there was a large segment of the science of the scientists of the day. They were viewed as rock stars by the general public. I mean, that's how they came across. And the scientists of those times, kind of like a steampunk style genre, they hung out with, like, the equivalent of like the beat poets and the
Yeah.
long-haired musicians, and they all hung out together. They'd smoke cannabis together, or they'd drink absinthe.
Oh,
They'd
oh yeah.
they'd space out and talk about the life and cosmos and inspire each other. So he's thinking, when he's going through these places, I'm going to meet these great men, of these rugged, individualistic, explorers of the unknown. He says, it wasn't the case. He said, when I walked in there, time after time, everybody that I ran into, they were like quiet, feminized, pudgy, weak-minded, bureaucratic ant people. There,
Well,
there, there was there wasn't any independent free thinking. There were people that were obsequious, that were weak-willed, that lacked vitality and seemed to lack willpower and character, and they weren't working on anything new or innovative. They were just there for a paycheck. Even the people that were teaching in the higher level sciences, usually, he said that it was the opposite and worst thing that he could have. He was so discouraged because there was no magic there, there was no potential there. There were people that were resigned in life, that were collecting paychecks to put in time to live dreary lives. And so he said that when he realized that that was going to be the experience for the rest of the trip, and it was a long, extended trip that he had many, 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 many schools to go to, he said he got so depressed that when he was hundreds of miles from home and the train was going, on the tracks, he jumped off the train and hit the ground and broke his arm, and he ran home.
wow.
Yeah,
Wow. I mean, I giggled. I don't think it's funny. It was like an uncomfortable laughter.
sure.
That so where do you find the people that are on the cutting edge of technology today? I mean, or new exotic alternative technologies? I mean, I know they're out there, but where are they then? They're not in universities. They're not. Are they? You know.
It's funny. We have one of our members is a retired uh, Italian scientist, and
Hmm.
he worked a conventional science job. And he sent me some of the most heartwarming letters of encouragement that I've ever received from a fellow, you know, scientist or scientific researcher. And he says, there's not a lot of you out there. And he says, I totally sympathize and empathize. He says, I was never in a situation where, because of my life circumstance, I didn't feel free or able, to do what you're doing. It's like I had a position, and I had certain kinds of things going on in my life that I felt that for whatever reason I had to take care of, and I had to keep my mouth shut, and I had to do what I was told. And I got my paycheck, and when I retired, then I permitted myself to pursue things that were more of interest. And I saved all those letters, and he said, there are people like you out there. He says, there's not a lot, but, and I think he wanted to encourage me to not get discouraged and to not want to throw in the towel. He said that, keep your eyes open, because, there are other people like you out there, but where are they? I think that there are some. There are certainly some in the mainstream, but they usually are quiet, and they don't usually make much of a a public. Pons and Fleischmann is a good example of what happens to those that actually publish what they discover. This is the whole cold fusion fiasco. Malov may have been killed because he supported them. And Eugene Mallove was, probably one of the most intelligent, articulate, proponents that straddled properly both the mainstream and the alternative sciences. And he got wiped out. And he supported Pons and Fleischmann. And I think that outside of the mainstream, one thing I've noticed is that a lot of times, if I go to a certain event, if it's, especially if it's like a New Age style event, one of the things that I run into a lot that I try to have patience with, because I know that some of these people have good intentions. But one of the things that happens a lot is that you have affluent parents from some demographic that have not raised their children properly, and these children grow up into their late teens or early adulthood, and they don't really have much direction in life. They may have some good intentions someplace, but essentially they're somewhat lobotomized and pampered to the point where they're probably not really at an emotional or mental space where they can do something productive. And so what they essentially do is they look around for a costume or an archetype that appeals to their ego, that makes them feel better about themselves. And there's all kinds of these. If you go to a place like Burning Man or any kind of rave events, it's largely populated by these people. I'm not saying that there isn't any good in that kind of a community, and I'm not saying that there aren't any people in that venue that are really genuine and authentic. But what I'm saying is that there's a demographic of people that will put the costume on as a mad scientist, and they'll learn a little bit of the lingo, and they'll read a little bit of books, and then they'll play dress up, and they'll walk around, and they'll act like they're in the alternative sciences because it's a fun thing to do. And unfortunately, in my experience, what that tends to do is, while it might be entertaining in the short term for them to be a bit of a performer and get some attention, it's extremely damaging, to the concept of an individual who is authentically working in fringe science. And it's also extremely discouraging for the people that are really doing the work and not getting much support to run into these people.
Yeah.
So
Because they're discrediting your work because they're not.
not intentionally.
No, of course not. But it's just it's like just callousness and thoughtlessness, mindlessness. You know what I
Well, I
mean?
mean,
With
they're
maybe good intentions, but not misguided or. I'm sorry. Go on.
well, no, I mean,
Yeah.
everything you said is true. I mean, what they're doing is they're putting on a costume for a period of time because it's a distraction for them until they get bored with it and they try something else out. But a lot of times that crowd will go seeking out people like myself that are working in that area, and they want to associate with us because they think it makes them look good, or it makes them look real. Or
Yeah.
I've been in situations where I've been in situations where I don't even want to anyway. But to
I know where you're going with it. Yeah, you just go on.
the I think that probably where most of these people are that are working on alternative technology, they're often in seclusion, and they're often not public, and they don't usually have a public following. And any of them that have a following, usually the following is somewhat quiet and private. When I first started off, I was part of an online community, and back then it was before the internet. It was all BBS. There were hundreds of us that would communicate, and it was somewhat underground. And we knew who each other were, and we shared information, but we didn't talk to the public about it much. And I think that's probably where a lot of this work is going on. And if there are events and festivals and fairs that occur even throughout the States where some of these people will go to, and you'll see them congregate. The ones that are the really good ones and the really authentic ones don't get much media coverage. They don't get much press coverage.
Mhm. Well, of course, because the people
Yeah,
that own the media don't want
no,
don't want people to know about it,
no.
of course.
I
Yeah.
I would say that most of the events and festivals that we see talking about on places like Facebook,
Hmm.
and there's a couple. I know that there's a few that are held even annually, and they have quite a lot of public exposure, and they have a lot of speakers, and supposedly they deal with alternative sciences, but most of it's just it's horrible. It's basically it's a shit show. You know, it's the it's superficial pop for the masses with very little substance. So I don't know. Does that answer the question? Or is that
Yeah, it does. It does. Yeah. So just one more thing. What do you think? Well, I guess we kind of went over it before, but maybe so I can rephrase this. I can say, how can humanity contribute or is there any way that people outside of the outside of alternative science can contribute into to you guys in a way, and as far as like what am I trying to say? I lost my train of thought because like I had the question written down.
it sounds like it was a good question.
I was it was almost there. It was like I guess because it seems like you're saying that there are very few people. Then on the other hand, you were talking about how how humanity or how your technology encourages people to. I mean, you use your technology and you encourage people to learn together, right?
Yeah.
So how can I guess because there's so few scientists that are into alternative technology that have good intentions that really know their stuff, and then there are a lot of people that maybe have good intentions but are just callous. What would you like to see happen? I think, yeah.
Okay. So
How
you,
would you?
you mean like in regards to our group or just in humanity or
Humanity, I guess, as a whole, just trying to leave on a positive. Because I know this is what you're doing is very positive at the same time. It's very like I can understand how it can be very what do you call it frustrating. Because you're putting in all this work and you wanna see it go forward. And what would you like to see happen? I mean, what would you? I guess I should say that. What would you like to see happen with your technology and your intentions? I guess that's the best way to figure to.
it's funny because when I first started off doing what I was doing, I was very optimistic and very idealistic and very hopeful. And I used to make fun of people, hopefully not too horribly, but um, I used to think less of people that were jaded in certain ways. I
Mm,
used to think that that was, and maybe I still do. I mean, I don't think I've totally lost my um, hopefulness, but I certainly feel more jaded um, about certain things as time has passed. I don't really see I don't really see humanity collectively getting things together anytime soon. So what I would hope to see happen is not what I think will happen. What I would hope to see happen is I would hope to see people uh, generally across the planet start putting value back in things that matter. Um, I'd like to see less focus on materialism, and I'd like to see more focus on quality of life. Um, I'd like to see people putting more emphasis on their care for one another rather than on accumulating dollars. That would be nice. I'd also like to see. I would certainly like to see humanity break out of some of the paralyzing, numbing paradigms which they have permitted. I had real mixed feelings when a lot of different things were happening, including the Occupy movement was going on. On the one
Mm.
hand, I thought, okay, well, I think it's really cool that a lot of people they've reached a point that they're upset and they want to do something. Um, and
But it seems like a Burning Man situation, basically, right?
I, I think, yeah,
You're
I
saying?
think so. Maybe in some ways, and I think it was also, there's a certain mentality that the general public are in and have fallen in, which facilitates their victimization.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's, like, I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that there is a small segment of human beings that are somewhat malevolent and they take advantage of the rest of the population. That's
Yeah.
certainly true.
Yeah.
But I don't think that they could get away with it as much as they could unless there was, uh, you know, permission. There's a really good series. It's called The Century of the Self, and it's an exploration of, psychology in application to advertising and the shaping of society. And there's a really interesting guy. He's a young black fellow, and he is associated with the LaRouche movement. And his name is Sky Shields. And he's probably one of the most intelligent people that I've ever seen speak. And he's not that old. And gave he's given a number of presentations. And one of the presentations that he gave was on, so it was something along the lines of the physics of creativity. And what he said was that the politicians and the people that control society do so by understanding and manipulating gestalts. And it's by the engineering of gestalts that they get people to do what they do. And one of the critical factors in wielding a gestalt to shape a body of people is to appeal to and then control their vices. What are their basic pleasure and pain buttons?
Mm.
So
Yeah.
if you can, get a large body of people to focus on how their pleasure button is pressed, regardless of whether it's good for them actually, and regardless of what the long-term consequence is, you can get away with murder, and you will get away with
Yeah.
murder.
And literally you
Sure.
would. Yeah.
So
Definitely.
we as a species, if we don't admit to and confront actually that rotting and dark part of ourselves individually, not try to wish it away, not try to explain it away, not try to
Yeah.
excuse it away, not try to come up with fabricated new age rationales as to why it's permissible, but to actually take a really strong, hard, look, maybe using ancient, wisdom philosophies and say, okay, well, what is the vice actually inside of me, and what is the vice inside of us collectively as people, as a civic
Yeah.
body,
Yeah.
that are allowing this to happen? Because if that does not happen, I think what will occur is it will rot, and it will decay, and it will fall into chaos, and it will die. And so, what I think will happen, or what I suspect will happen, is that there will probably be some effort of a breakaway civilization, and I have a feeling that there probably won't just be one, and it will probably get to the point where there is such a meltdown, and people have let things slide so much and so badly, that there will be an attempt made to simply leave the existing social structure paradigm and to escape and to try to start over again. And this is what's happened in the past. I mean, certainly
Mm.
this is how your country began.
Yeah.
And but I think that it's a little bit different now, because I think that the stakes are higher and the playing field is different. And I have a feeling that probably the way things are now and the way they're going is that there will be a very high level order of a breakaway civilization occur, which will probably happen among the privileged, the people that are among the 1%. I believe that they've been in the process of creating breakaway civilization and that they're engaged in that now, and they fully expect and anticipate the rest of the planet to melt down, and they're preparing for that, and they probably want that to happen, and they probably feel fairly secure that they're going to be okay and make it. And I think that there will be various fragments in the rest of the civic body of the planet that will make an attempt, to break away. They'll be probably generally less well equipped, less funded, and they probably won't. Most of them probably won't make it. But there may, with any luck, be a very small segment that somehow makes it, probably under, I'm guessing, probably under somewhat austere living conditions, and with any luck, they'll survive. But if you were to ask me what would I hope and what do I think I see as an emerging future, that would be my response generally.
Okay, wow, wow. So we're out of time.
Okay.
It was really great talking with you. You're so smart, but yet you're so humble. It's really just an honor to be in your presence. I'm glad we finally, after all this time, got a chance to talk and interview. So very, very happy about that. We will be right back after this break. And Donald, before we leave, I want you to tell people where they can go and buy frequencies and read your testimonials. What is your website again?
Yeah. Thank you so much for the kind feedback, and people can access us at www.soundofstars.org.
All right, cool. All right, we will be back. You can stop. You can just stop and then